The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. And that is exactly what we are about in this sesshin, and hopefully in our whole life, because what we can open to is so amazing. When we're tiny children, we're exploring the world. That is, assuming we've had a wonderful, loving family to be born into and are being cared for carefully and lovingly. And so we have this adventure, and we have no ideas about what we're going to be seeing or what we're going to be feeling. We're just simply exploring. And that's exactly what we are doing now that we're grown up and we're sitting in a zendo. And hopefully not just when we're sitting in the zendo, but also at other times as well. In fact, hopefully all the time. Because the more we can live open to possibility, rather than assuming we know all about what's going to happen, or what is, or what isn't, or who is this, or who is that, if we are instead in that space of beginner's mind that Shunryu Suzuki talks about, or the only don't know mind that Sungsan Sunim spoke of, this mind of not knowing and openness to what might be revealed. Because if we think we know, and now this is a little bit different from, for example, if you're an engineer and you're ready to do some calculations to make sure that a building or a bridge or a road or whatever is going to be sufficiently supported, then it is important to have facts and to have a certain level of knowledge in the right brain type of knowledge. But for life in general, outside of those specific circumstances, life is so much more free and open and potentially joyous when we don't go into it assuming we know everything about it. There is a precept, the first precept actually, not to kill, but to cherish all life. And it is very apt in this particular situation. When we think we know what a person is like, when we think we have an image of this person as good, bad, different, ugly, fat, thin, etc., then we react to that image instead of opening ourselves to the moment as it is and the person as they are. And we are basically freezing that person into a mold of our own choosing. And that is a form of killing. And it's just as devastating to people as sticking a knife in. It's something to really be aware of. And yet our culture is full of assumptions about people, and not only assumptions, but encouraging us to express certain views of people and things. One of the excellent movements in this seemingly new age that is beginning to unfold in this day and age is a hard look at racism, a hard look at the justice system, which may be a misnomer, and to consider, for example, particularly the juvenile justice system, whether we are just being punitive or whether we are really out to help these kids or these older people to live a life of of positive energy rather than a life of crime. It's known, for example, that most of the people who end up in the juvenile justice system have been traumatized in childhood, have had what is known as adverse childhood experiences. And so they never felt loved, they never felt supported, and they're desperately trying to survive. And they find themselves in gangs and other communities that are not so positive. And so they go on to commit crimes. And it sometimes has very sad endings. In fact, it often has sad endings. There's a family here in the Valley who had a son. And when he was in high school, he got mixed up with the wrong kids. And that's easy to do. It's so easy to do because of cultural pressures, peer pressures. And there was a crime committed, and I think it might have been a murder actually. And though he was not the one that pulled the trigger, he was so terrified of going to prison because the prison in Santa Fe, the federal prison, has a terrible, terrible reputation. And that he actually hung himself. He died before he could ever go to trial. I don't know what his growing up was like. The family was a decent family. And I doubt that he was abused as a kid, but who knows? I just don't know about his childhood. I knew the young man, and he was a real sweetheart. And it's sad that this kind of thing can happen. And this happens because we have ideas about how things ought to be and who people ought to be. And unfortunately, that almost forces them into being in accordance with our image. That's just one of the side effects of not having a mind that's open to possibility. And it is one of the sources of pain and suffering that human beings inflict on themselves and each other. Mahayana Buddhism is about relieving suffering. It's about doing whatever we can to relieve suffering. And that has to go from a very deep level to be successful. The condition of the current world affairs speaks to that, really. We have wars, we have people incarcerated for generations. Recently in the news, there was a recognition that a man who I think as a teenager had been accused of a murder and sent to death row and actually executed 4 years ago. And DNA has just recently recognized that he was not guilty. So horrible things can happen because we're not clear in our minds. And our practice, our meditation practice, is about becoming clear, increasingly clear, truly increasingly clear. And it changes us, and it changes so much around us as well. It reaches people who have no obvious connection with us. It reaches more than people. It reaches animals and birds and so on. For example, one of the common pictures of St. Francis is with the birds, feeding the birds. The birds were so friendly to him because he was let go enough that there was no threat. There was simply a connection, a positive connection. And when we can live in a way where there's a positive connection between us and others, it makes all the difference in the world. Now, this does not mean not getting angry, not moving in a direction that calls for justice in circumstances where justice is really, really imperative. It doesn't mean sort of wandering through life in a kind of an accepting daze. It means being so present that any ideas about things don't get in the way of a clear, deep, profound understanding of what to do in each circumstance. And the more let go we can be, the more readily that happens in our life. And it's quite amazing. It's real. But it takes practice to uncover that mind of clarity that allows that way of being to unfold. When it does, it is joyous. And it always works out in exactly the right way. And that way may not be what we would think it should work out as, but it always ends up being exactly the right way to unfold. So I'd like to share with you now something about reaching that mind. This is from a book called Luminous Mind, The Way of the Buddha. And I think we're getting there we are without the reflection from the windows. This is the teachings of Kalu Rinpoche. Kalu Rinpoche was a teacher, a Tibetan Buddhist teacher, in a form of Tibetan Buddhism that was quite close to Zen practice. And it's so interesting that the Tibetan Buddhists have such an easy, simple, readily comprehensible way of teaching the Dharma and expressing the Dharma. I don't know what it is about this, but it's easy to be very inspired by the Tibetan Buddhist teachers that I've encountered. And Kalu Rinpoche is one of them. When we moved from Rochester in the early 1980s, 1981 specifically, to Santa Fe, with the intent of building a country retreat place for Roshi Kapleau so that he could go into semi-retirement with a few senior students and leave the Rochester Zen Center in the hands, in very capable hands of Tony Packer. We came out, and it was a kind of amazing and very heartening. Rochester in those days, the greater Rochester area had a population of 500,000. Santa Fe had a population of about 60,000. Rochester Zen Center was the only non-Asian Zen center in Rochester. There was one other small temple, a Cambodian temple, Cambodian Buddhist temple at the time. That was it. It was just a little storefront Buddhist temple. But in Santa Fe, of all places, this tiny little town, there were 5 or 6 different Zen groups already, each with connections to different teachers. None of them had teachers in residence at the time, but they had connections with teachers. And there was one Tibetan Buddhist group that was connected to Kalu Rinpoche. And in fact, when we bought our little house in Santa Fe, right down the street was the Tibetan Center. It was also in a little house. We were all in the very, very old part of Santa Fe, the barrio, really. And we used to go down and visit them. There was a Lama there, Lama Dorje, and several of the students were actually in residence in little cottages right around it. It was very, very heartening to have a Sangha right there. And at the time, they were trying to get permission from the city to build a stupa. We were trying to get permission from the city to build a Zen center. And so we used to go to the meetings of the, what we called the XTZ, Extraterritorial Zoning Commission, and to support each other in our appeals to get permits to build or to establish religious organizations in those neighborhoods. They were successful. We were not, but that's another story. During those years, Kalu Rinpoche was still alive, and he would come through town every so often and give talks, and we would go and listen to the talks. And they were so inspiring. They didn't take us away from our Zen practice. They brought us more deeply into our Zen practice. It was a bit risque because in those days, we were not supposed to listen to other teachers, but it turned out to be very supportive. And so when I found this book, Luminous Mind, and it's the second book that I have of Kalu Rinpoche's teachings. The first one is called A Flash of Lightning in the Dark Night. And the flash of lightning in the dark night speaks to the experience of Kensho. We have early on in Zen practice had this idea that you do your Zazen, and at a certain point, boom, lightning strikes, and you are fully and completely awake. Not exactly. You've seen a little bit. In fact, when I was passed on my Koan Mu by Roshi Kaplo, I was sitting on a mat, zabuton, in the Doksan room. He was sitting on his mat in the Doksan room. He took his kotsu, the stick that is the insignia of a teacher in the Soto sect, and he pointed to a place, well, he started at the corner, and he pointed to a place about maybe 4 inches in from the corner. And the whole mat is something like 30 inches wide. He said, this is where you're at this point in time. He says, it's very significant, but in terms of the full extent to where a person can open to, it's the whole width of the zabuton. And that's the case. We think that we're just going to be home free with this one Kensho experience, but it's not that. And moreover, most Kenshos in this culture these days, because there's so many distractions, are relatively superficial. It's enough to maybe begin working on subsequent koans, maybe not. There are plenty of cases where teachers have misinterpreted and tried to start a student on subsequent koans. I inherited a student that had that experience, and it just wasn't working. They didn't have a deep enough opening to be able to really comprehend subsequent koans. And that's why we are very, very careful here about putting people on subsequent koans, making sure that they do have the depth essential to continue deepening, and not just to make the koan work a kind of a existential exercise. And Kalu Rinpoche compared a flash of lightning in the dark night to Kensho. He said that if you're walking up a mountain trail at midnight on a moonless night, you're kind of feeling your way along. This is the way practice is for some time. And then suddenly there's a flash of lightning and you can briefly see the path ahead. So now you know where to go, at least up to a point. And that's essentially what Kensho is about. And the thing is, you don't want to just go for one Kensho. You want to use Hakuin's example of 19 major Kensho experiences to follow. The practice, in my experience, doesn't have an end. One can go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And it's worth it. So let me share something about or something of the teachings of Kalu Rinpoche from this book, Luminous Mind. And let me see if these other glasses will work better. My funky eyesight makes reading a bit challenging, especially small print. There is a poem that he recites under a title of The Mind of Immediacy. And here he's speaking of the practice of Mahamudra, which is very, very similar to Zen practice. In itself, the practice of Mahamudra is extremely simple and easy. There are no visualizations or complicated exercises, just like in Zen. There's nothing to do. It is enough just to leave the mind in its natural state as it is, as it comes, without contrivance. It's simple, but it's not really that easy without a lot of practice, because our mind is so so used to lots of contrivances. We're filled with thoughts. We're filled with ideas. We're filled with visions. We're filled with fragments of conversations. We're filled with fragments of songs and sounds. We're easily distracted. Put a television in the room, even if we're way off to the side, if it's on, we're darting over to the screen because it's flickering. And on computers, as you scroll through the news or whatever else, you'll find little videos suddenly popping up with a great deal of animation in an attempt to distract you. And that's common without computers. It's what goes on in our minds. So when he's talking about the basic nature of mind, he's talking about it when we are not caught in those external seeming situations, the thoughts, the ideas, the pictures, the memories, the emotions, and all the rest of that. In the tradition of Mahamudra, it is said that Mahamudra is too close to be recognized, too deep to grasp, too easy to believe, and too amazing to be understood intellectually. This is our true nature. Let's go through that one again. Too close to be recognized. It is said in Zen, it's closer than your own eyes. Too deep to grasp, because it's beyond grasping. Too easy to believe. It's so easy. Why would you believe it would be that easy? Isn't it something phenomenal? Isn't it something hard to earn, difficult to uncover? Only if we look at it that way. Too amazing to be understood intellectually. There are 4 obstacles that prevent its recognition. Gampopa, who was an ancient master in the Tibetan system, said, "Still water is clear. Mind free of strain is happy." So I was initially going to share with you the instructions on Mahamudra, but the thing is, I think that's the cart getting ahead of the horse, because they are so simple. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking all you have to do is hang out in your mind. And that is one of the mistakes that people who think they're doing shikantaza fall into. So let me share something else here. And this is mind's 3 bodies. Natural mind has a quality of clear transparency, in which it has 3 essential aspects that exist spontaneously: emptiness, clarity, and unimpededness. Emptiness, clarity, and unimpededness. These are the qualities of our mind. But if we try to find emptiness, if we try to find clarity, if we try to find unimpededness, we're just creating images of these things. And this is where the challenge to our practice lies. Mind's transparency is its essential emptiness. Its knowing and luminous nature is its clarity. And the aspects of its enlightened experience are its unimpededness. When mind is in this state of limpid transparency, open and lucid, it is fully aware in a state of bare awareness. Bare awareness. I mentioned Toni Packer. She spoke of bare awareness. She ended up leaving the Rochester Zen Center because she had felt greater affinity with an Indian teacher, Krishnamurti, than with Zen. And because the bylaws at the Rochester Zen Center require that the abbot be a Zen Buddhist, or a Buddhist at least, she didn't qualify anymore. So she left and started her own center, the Springwater Center. And she felt that an optimal way of practice was through inquiry that resulted in bare awareness. And that's actually Zen practice. Openness to possibility. That's the inquiry. It's not, I mean, yes, we can say we're working on a koan. What is our face before our parents were born? What is mu? What is the sound of one hand? Who are we? And so on and so forth. But at base, it's silent inquiry. When we have words in our mouth or our mind, it's words in our mind. And that's impeding the clarity. Openness to possibility means allowing the mind to rest as if we're an impartial observer, except that, of course, there is no observer and mind separate from observer. When we allow ourselves to simply experience the natural state of the mind, sure, thoughts may arise, but simply to recognize that thoughts are arising and not to follow them, not to get caught in them, gradually opens us to a place of deeper and deeper clarity. And we have to start there because our minds are full of stuff. We've been taught to think. We've been taught to do what Kalu used to call thoughting, just random thoughts, and just to, in many cases, make us feel like we exist. And yet there is this amazing existence that lies clear and unimpeded, empty, that when we can open to that it is beyond comprehension, really, but immensely freeing. We're not caught by our emotions. We're not caught by situations. And in not being caught by these things, there's space in which to deeply discern the most appropriate way to respond to them, rather than to react to situations and emotions. And it's a very different way of living. So much more free, so much more joyful, even when there is chaos around us, so much more peaceful. So let's continue. The mind is in the state of limpid transparency, open and lucid. It is fully aware in a state of bare awareness. It is pristine awareness in all their aspects. This empty awareness, clear and unlimited, is not far from us. It is our actual face. But like our own face, it cannot perceive itself. This is what we call ignorance, not being able to perceive, which is simply the absence of bare awareness. In order to get beyond ignorance, we have to see its empty nature without conceptualizing. And this is the challenge, because we are so accustomed to conceptualizing, and our mind works in that way, actually. There's a reason for conceptualizing, and it can be useful. It would be kind of hard to learn chemistry or mathematics or any other of those kinds of subjects without conceptualizing. And there's a role for learning those things, those kinds of things. But it doesn't have to be exclusive of this bare awareness, which really relates to how we live. Cognition is a tool. It's a useful tool. It separates us from wild animals, actually. It's one of the things that makes us human. It allows us to create speech and understand other people's speech. There's a reason for it. And it's a valuable experience, but it's not all of reality. And this is what is so important. We take it as the master, and it's not. And we suffer as a result. To continue. This is how practice progresses. But remember that these essential qualities of mind are not anything we have to try to produce. They're mind's very nature, and we have only to recognize them. The mind, being naturally empty, is forever the Dharmakaya, the body of emptiness of the absolute body of the Buddha. Being naturally lucid, it is also the Sambhogakaya, the complete enjoyment body of Buddha. And since it is naturally unlimited knowledge, it is forever the Nirmanakaya, the manifestation body of Buddha. So mind is always by nature the three bodies of the Buddha, naturally and spontaneously free. Nothing could possibly be done to improve its perfection. The realization of Mahamudra is called innate primordial awareness, because the three aspects of mind's essential nature, emptiness, clarity, and unobstructiveness or unimpededness, always exist because they are innate. And the only reason we don't recognize that is because they're covered up by all the yada yada and all the distractions. And in this day and age, when we have so many distractions and so many attempts to distract us, to get us to buy things, to get us to do things, to get us to like things, just look at Facebook, just look at any computer screen in action. and you'll find it trying to bring you into its realm of attachment, really. So we have our challenges in this life. In ancient times, the golden age of Zen, there were so many great masters that came out of that. Joshu, Rinzai, many others. And in those days, life was quite simple. Often, kids left home at the age of 8, 9, 10, 12, sometimes to go into the monastery. And there wasn't much to distract a person from practice. Sure, there were cultural things, but there was no television, there was no telephone, there was no telegraph, there were no streetcars, there were no cars, no trains, no airplanes. Life was considerably more simple. And so it was simpler. It was easier. There were still challenges. The massive monasteries, Zen monasteries, I don't know about the other ones, but there's some information about the Zen monasteries in those days in China. And monks had slaves and owned property, which was kind of bizarre. Nowadays, theoretically, that doesn't happen, but it does anyway. Many of the teachers of Zen in America are in relationship and have careers. And as a matter of fact, in the Rochester Zen Center lineage, it's okay to be ordained and be in a helping profession. That's part of the Bodhisattva vow, really. But we have so much more to distract us, so constantly. And we have grown accustomed to wrapping that constant interaction with screens and ideas and people and all the rest around us, and we feel naked without it. Many years ago, during the height of the AIDS crisis, in Rochester, we became members of the AIDS Interfaith Council because there were some churches in Rochester that were going into the hospital rooms of dying patients and distributing different pamphlets and things, calling them evil and telling them they're going to hell because of their being not heterosexual. And it was pretty awful situation. Can you imagine dying and being rejected by humanity, or at least by the people that you knew? So the churches got together, the other churches got together to provide support for people who were impacted by AIDS, whether they had it or they had friends or they had families. And every month there would be a different spiritual event in different spiritual communities in Rochester. And once a year, there was a joint experience. And the first year we were involved, they had no idea what to do with Zen folks. And so this was an all-night vigil. And all the different churches and their congregations were invited. And there were speakers, and there were mainly speakers during the whole evening. And what they did for we Zen folks was to have 3 times throughout the evening a moment of silence, 60 seconds of silence. They thought that would be what would work for us, and it could have, except that nobody could manage it. We, the group of us who were there from the Zen Center, of course, we're accustomed to silence, but none of the rest of the folks in that big church could manage to sit still and not shift posture, move feet, cough, whisper, and all the rest. And there were 3 different speakers up at the podium for each of these 3 moments of silence. And not a single one of them could even hold a single 60 seconds of silence. They had to interrupt it. This is a statement about the human condition, really, current human condition. And so we're sort of trying to row upstream in our practice to let go of these kinds of distractions. And that's why practice is so challenging, because we have these distractions at hand, and at this point they're built in. But so is our innate true nature built in. And we can uncover it. And the way to uncover it is through utter presence, openness to possibility. Extending the out breath makes a big difference in helping to cut through the chatter, because it forces a focus. We can't extend the out breath beyond a certain point without letting go other involvements. And that is its gift. So it becomes kind of a jet assist to practice. But beyond that, it's about openness to possibility. Each of us has come into a Zendo because we've got some question. It may not be wordless. It may not be a worded question. It may be a wordless question. In Roshi Kapleau's case, for example, you probably know that he was a court reporter for the war crimes trials in Nuremberg, Germany, and also in Tokyo, Japan. And he was struck by the difference between the reactivity of the German population and that of the Japanese population. And in addition to that, he would spend his off moments in Buddhist temples, in the gardens. And he was so struck by the deep peace that when he went back to the States after that work, he enrolled in classes under D.T. Suzuki at Columbia University, find out what this Buddhism was all about, and eventually went to Japan to actually practice it. And it was not easy for him either, even though he went at a time when there were fewer distractions in our American culture than we have now. Still, he stuck it out, and the rest is history. His question that took him to go ahead and end up going to Japan to train in Zen practice was, why is there suffering? Combined with the sense of peace in those temple gardens. Almost like the Buddha, who had the famous 4 sights, 1, 2, 3, 4. The sick person, the old person, the corpse, and then finally, the person of spiritual practice, who radiated peace. So he saw these other conditions that were painful and frightening. And then the last was to see someone who had gone beyond and was no longer caught in their ideas about these things. So whether we have a voiced question or not, there's something in here that draws us to Zen practice, because there's some sense that there's something that we need to get back to. There's something important to open up to before we die and to live from. So we tune in to that yearning. We tune into that sense of needing to know and use that with the openness to possibility. If we're working on a koan, we start with memorizing the koan, and then we drop into the questioning, the wordless questioning, the need to know the answer that the koan will reveal to us. And that's how we practice. And that's how we gradually uncover this limpid, transparent, unimpeded, profound, natural mind that we are. So I thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.